The moment I realized my blind date was a complete disaster, I was already planning my escape. My fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden table, my forced smile beginning to ache, and every second felt heavier than the last. Across from me sat a stranger who barely looked up from his phone, his words sharp, dismissive, and hollow. I remember thinking that maybe this was the universe's way of reminding me why I had stopped believing in second chances. And just when I was about to stand up, grab my jacket, and walk out for good, a waitress leaned in slightly and said something so unexpected, so quietly powerful, that it froze me in place. If I were you, I'd stay. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the idea that even the worst days can turn into something meaningful, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Pryadko. You never know who might need a story like this today. It had been almost 3 years since I had agreed to go on any kind of date. Life had a way of hardening me after everything that happened. My last relationship hadn't just ended. It had collapsed, leaving behind a silence that echoed in every part of my life. Since then, I buried myself in work, routines, and the quiet comfort of solitude. But when my coworker insisted that I meet someone nice and different, I reluctantly agreed, convincing myself that maybe it was time to try again. That's how I ended up in that small, cozy cafe on a warm afternoon, sunlight pouring through the large windows, casting soft golden patterns across the wooden floor. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt suffocating. The man sitting across from me, Rohanveer, was nothing like I had imagined. Within minutes, it became painfully clear that this was not going anywhere. He interrupted constantly, laughed at his own jokes, and seemed more interested in checking notifications than having a real conversation. Every attempt I made to connect felt like it bounced off an invisible wall. I nodded politely, counting the seconds in my head, waiting for the moment I could leave without appearing rude. But beneath my growing frustration was something deeper, disappointment. Not just in him, but in myself for believing, even for a moment, that something different could happen. That's when she appeared. The waitress moved gracefully between tables, her presence calm and steady, like someone who had seen countless stories unfold in that very room. There was something different about her, not just the way she carried herself, but the way her eyes seemed to notice things others missed. When she approached our table, she placed a glass of water in front of me and paused, just for a second longer than necessary. Then she leaned in slightly and said, almost in a whisper, "If I were you, I'd stay." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. Stay? Why would I stay in a situation that felt so uncomfortable, so pointless? I looked at her, confused, searching for some explanation, but she simply offered a small, knowing smile before walking away. Her words lingered in my mind, echoing louder than anything my date was saying. Stay? I didn't understand it, but something about the way she said it, calm, certain, made me hesitate. My hand, which had been inching toward my bag, stopped. Minutes passed. Rohanveer continued talking, unaware of the shift happening inside me. I began to notice things I hadn't before. Not about him, but about the room. The laughter from another table. The quiet hum of conversation. The way sunlight softened everything it touched. And then, something unexpected happened. He stopped talking. It was subtle at first, like a pause that lasted just a bit too long. He looked down at his phone, then set it aside, exhaling slowly. For the first time since we had met, his expression changed. The arrogance faded, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. He looked up at me, and his voice, when he spoke again, was different, softer, real. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't considered before, that maybe the version of him I had been seeing wasn't the whole story. Maybe it was a shield. Maybe it was nervousness hidden behind arrogance. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure anymore. The conversation shifted. It wasn't dramatic or instant, but it was real. He began asking questions, genuine ones. He listened. He stumbled over his words, occasionally catching himself mid-sentence, as if he was learning how to be present for the first time in a long while. He admitted, quietly, that he hadn't been on a date in years either, that he didn't really know how to act, that he was afraid of being judged, so he tried too hard to appear confident. And just like that, the tension that had been building inside me started to unravel. I thought about the waitress again, about her quiet certainty, about how she had seen something I hadn't. Time passed differently after that. What had felt like an unbearable stretch of minutes turned into something lighter, almost effortless. We talked about small things at first, favorite places, random memories, the kind of conversations that don't demand anything but presence. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I was smiling. Not the forced, polite smile from before, but something real. When the waitress returned to our table, she didn't say anything this time. She didn't need to. Our eyes met for a brief second, and I felt an unspoken understanding pass between us. She had known. As the afternoon began to fade into early evening, we stepped outside together. The air felt different, cooler, lighter, filled with a quiet sense of possibility. We stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say next. But this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. We didn't make any promises. There was no grand declaration, no perfect ending, just a simple agreement to meet again, to see where things might go. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I thought I had lost. Hope. Before you continue, I want to ask you something personal. If this story has touched even a small part of your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share this video. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest moments can change everything. But before we reach the end, I have a special request for you. Comment the word "stay" below if you believe that sometimes walking away too soon might make you miss something beautiful. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Not just the date, but the moment that changed it all. The moment I almost left, and the stranger who told me not to. A few days later, I returned to the cafe. Not for another date, but for something else. Something unfinished. She was there, just like before, moving quietly between tables. When she saw me, she paused, her expression softening into a small smile. I walked up to her, unsure of what I was supposed to say. How do you thank someone for something they didn't explain? But somehow she understood. Before I could speak, she said something that stayed with me long after I left. She told me that people leave too quickly, that they decide too fast, that sometimes the moment you feel like walking away is the moment something real is about to begin. And as I stood there, listening to her, I realized she wasn't just talking about that day. She was talking about life. When I walked out of that cafe again, I wasn't the same person who had walked in days earlier. Something had shifted. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to matter. Enough to change the way I saw things. Because sometimes, the worst beginnings hide the most meaningful endings. And sometimes, all it takes is someone reminding you to stay.